welcome to second interview. I really enjoyed it when we did it with Jeff Ross last week, and it did pretty well. So I wanted to do it again. Anyways, I brought a legendary guest. This guy's writing is some of the best. If you haven't checked it out, you're definitely missing out. His name is Tomer. How you doing, Tomer?
I'm good. Peace. How's it going?
Good, man. So to start our conversation, I really want to read a passage from one of your last pieces of writing. The
Okay.
actual name of the writing was called "The Legendary Treasure of Satoshi Nakamoto," and this just absolutely blew my mind. And I might even get excited and get Opti into the conversation because
All
of
right.
how awesome this passage was. But it basically says money has not generally been regarded as anything to do with journeys into the non material realm of the spirit. It is generally believed to belong to the material world. It can buy certain things, but it cannot buy friendship, love, intelligence, or the answers to deep and internal questions about the mysteries of the universe. In fact, money is accused of leading people away from these things. This, however, takes us to the curious matter of Bitcoin. That is that is fascinating, and that kind of gives me memories of when you hear it from your parents when you're young. Um, money's the root of all evil. Were they talking about fiat money the entire time?
Right. Yeah. Um, it's uh, it's a really interesting thing that the more time that you spend with Bitcoin, the the more you're drawn to asking deep and philosophical questions, and not just about money, but about spirituality, even, right? And that could just be about personality, about what makes us us, right? Not just the material chemicals that make us up, but what makes the personality and the values and the morals that we have, and why do we pursue certain things over others, and what are this article that you're citing. I published it a couple of weeks ago. I wrote it many months ago, and I was hoping to be able to do something more with it than just publish it as an article. I wanted to make a film out of it, but things were taking long, and I eventually felt this strong calling to just publish it, but I didn't really think people would read it. And it's ironically, I was very mistaken about that because it's turned out to be my most read article that I've published in my career so far about Bitcoin. I had one that I published that was a criticism of Ethereum that got picked up in the mainstream press and the tech press. And so that one ended up being far and away my most read article. But this is the most read Bitcoin article I've written. And it really resonated with a lot of people because in it, I do take people down this journey and say, why is it that Bitcoin stirs a spiritual awakening in so many people? And I think what I've managed to do by analyzing the experience that I went through and that I've seen many other people go through is actually explain why it does that. And I begin this article with retelling the story of the invention of Bitcoin and the story of Satoshi Nakamoto and how extraordinary that story is, and also at the same time is a true story because it reads better than the best mystery, the best adventure, the best action story that you may have ever heard. It's almost impossible to believe, except that we can verify every single part of this story because it's unfolding right before our very eyes, and every aspect of it is perfectly documented. So maybe I'll just pause there. But this is, I was really happy to write this. This piece came to me all in kind of one morning after I'd had a long conversation the night before with another Bitcoiner about the spiritual journey that Bitcoin took us down and the kind of questions it made us ask about life and society and civilization. And then it just came to me, and then it's called The Legendary Treasure of Satoshi Nakamoto because after I present all of these things, I'm able to tell another true tale of what the legendary treasure of Satoshi Nakamoto represents. What do all these coins that Satoshi mined and never touched stand for? And but I won't spoil it for people who haven't read it yet. But if you haven't read it yet, I really encourage you to read it. Oh, I can't hear you, Nico.
Oh, there we go.
Oh,
My
okay.
awesome producer in the back, Opti, doing his magic. How important do you think the story of Satoshi is to Bitcoin, the mythology, so to speak. And I'm going to tie this in with fiat money. I think the symbolism in fiat money, it's very important as well. There is a freaking pyramid with an eye on the back
Mm,
of fiat money. So clearly
mhm.
symbolism in general is important in money. Um, how important is the story of Satoshi? How important was it, Tomer, that Satoshi stepped away when he did?
Oh yeah. So two pieces. So first of all, the story of Satoshi is fundamental to Bitcoin because if the story of Satoshi had been, if almost any single part of it had been any different, I think Bitcoin would be fundamentally different and would be compromised in certain ways. I think the fact that it was such a hard invention to come up with, and in fact, the invention solved a problem that had been proven by mathematicians and computer scientists to be impossible to solve in theory. Right? But Satoshi comes up with this practical solution to the Byzantine generals problem or the double spend problem that works in practice, even though in theory you can't come up with a solution. And he does so, and he presents it, and we don't know who Satoshi is, right? In advance of releasing this creation, having come up with this incredible invention that also disproved the common wisdom of everybody else, he put his ego on the back end because it wasn't Satoshi Nakamoto that invented Bitcoin. That was just a pseudonym that whoever did invent Bitcoin used. There is no Satoshi Nakamoto. There's a mask, right? It's a disguise. It's like a superhero costume that is Satoshi Nakamoto. And so this person, whoever it was, knew that they had to do this in a way that preserved their anonymity, just like the superheroes in the comic books, right? We can't know, the people in the universe of Superman can't know that he's Clark Kent. The people in the universe of Spider-Man can't know that he's Peter Parker because it'll screw everything up. And he needs to be the mythological figure. And that's what Satoshi knew in advance. He did it to protect himself and to be able to release and free the invention from the inventor. Right? When Satoshi disappeared, the invention is left to live on its own. And that is a really, really fundamentally crucial element. And it can only happen if we never knew who the inventor was. Like if Vitalik Buterin now says, well, I'm leaving the project, it's still everybody's going to say, well, what do we do about this? What do we do about that? He can't leave. He's forever the inventor. And nobody knows who the inventor of Bitcoin is, right? We have this name, Satoshi Nakamoto, but we don't have a person to attach it to. There's no face, there's no voice. There's just a handful of textual writings, like the white paper, which I have behind me, and with such it's like such a sacred document that I blew it up and made it as big as I could. There, so this whole story of Satoshi is so fundamental to the creation of Bitcoin that here is this genius who solves a problem, but doesn't flout it. Doesn't flout his identity. Doesn't use his discovery to gain anything for himself. He doesn't use it to become a powerful man on the world stage. He doesn't use it to become a rich man. He doesn't use it to become a famous man. Right? He has zero fame. He has zero wealth. He has zero power. So he surrenders all of it, and he basically makes Bitcoin a gift to the human race. And that is a really extraordinary thing. He didn't do an IPO to get rich, right? Or ICO to get rich. He didn't pre-mine a bunch of coins and sell them for money to venture capitalists. He came up with an invention. He took no credit for it as whoever he was, and he gave it as a gift to the world, and he tended to it until it was mature enough that he could leave it. And then he didn't stick around. He had the courage or the generosity to actually leave and disappear. And so it's really, really extraordinary. It's what makes Bitcoin Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin isn't Bitcoin if there's a leader who we know who they are and they got rich and they're famous and they're powerful and they're pulling all the strings of Bitcoin. The beauty of Bitcoin is it exists independent of the control of any human being on earth, including its creator.
One of the comments that we always hear, I, I guess on the battlegrounds of Twitter, on one of the things that you always hear, one of the things, the rumors that you always hear is that Satoshi owns 1 million coins, right? That's the rumor,
Right.
right? And one of the questions that I always get from people that are going in is, what if he just goes and sell those coins on the top? I fundamentally believe no one has access to those coins anymore. And I'm going to tie it up with the Genesis block. The Genesis block, the Bitcoin that's there, a lot of people have donated Bitcoin to there. It's unspendable, right?
Right.
Um, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that that Bitcoin is tied up? Do you believe that 10, 20 years from now, Satoshi's going to go, ha ha, and just dump all his Bitcoin?
If you've read my article, you know what I think, right? Those coins will never move. Those coins are a monument that's going to last forever, right? Like nobody will ever be able to touch. Every one of us can see those coins. They're there on the blockchain. They haven't moved. They won't ever move, and they stand there forever. Like for anyone anywhere who syncs a node up or who acts as an explorer, they can see those coins. And as much as they might lust after them or try to hack Bitcoin or try to do anything to them, they cannot touch those coins. And this is again, without spoiling too much of the end of the article, this is what Satoshi did with his money. He didn't use it to buy himself a fancy Lamborghini or to make himself famous or to buy power and influence. He left it as this monument to what he accomplished, which is some of more than what I just elucidated about what he did. And there it is, standing forever. And you can't, it's a price. It's a monument that's worth more than than 1 million Bitcoin. And no matter how much 1 million Bitcoin is worth in purchasing power, here is a monument that is going to last forever that nobody can destroy, right? Nobody can touch it. It's quite amazing. It's about the only indestructible thing in the world, and it's Satoshi's stack of coins. And take it if you can. I was saying the story, but you can't because it's a remnant of it's an effect of the invention that he made, an immalleable, indestructible entity, and his coins stand there as a monument to the indestructibility of it and to the creativity and to the generosity and humility that this person who went by the name Satoshi Nakamoto for a couple of years represented. I'm missing the exact word, right? But that's what he stood for, and it's quite remarkable. And it is like this superhero story. Like if you were doing a movie that showed the story of whoever Satoshi Nakamoto was, he puts on his cape, he does this heroic deed, and then he disappears and goes off and lives his life however he lives it, but he leaves that whole thing behind. And it becomes, this is probably one of the most well-known brands in the world. He's the creator of the machine that became this brand, that became this incredibly well-known brand without ever spending a nickel on marketing. Like he never raised any money for it. He didn't buy an ad campaign for Bitcoin. It's like the people came towards this great invention that was created by a single person anonymously, who then abandoned it. And the masses keep getting bigger and bigger, and the value of it keeps getting bigger and bigger because people recognize the achievement that this thing of Bitcoin is. And and he resists all temptation to come back and do anything of the sort of spending these coins. There's been so much, it's not like he's sitting on the brink. There were many times in the history of Bitcoin right now where if money or saving even helping Bitcoin was what he wanted to do, he would have come back to do that. But he let it sit, in a sense, as a test of what was built, right? That it could now stand on its own without its creator's support, but also to continue to exist in that humble way, which is, I've done the thing that I came to do, whatever it was, right? And it wasn't for money, and it wasn't for power, and it wasn't for fame. And this is what takes me back to why Bitcoin becomes such a spiritual awakening for people, because you can see that heroes really do exist. And heroes can accomplish great things that people think are impossible, and they don't have to do it for selfish reasons of fame, power, or money. They can do it for making the world a better place and giving a gift to the world. And that's what Satoshi did. And so it's a really, really extraordinary story with a profound ending, right? Like just such a deep, emotional, and meaningful ending to it And the story goes on, right? Like the Satoshi's part of the story ends, but the story of Bitcoin as this movement that grows and everyone who's in it is a volunteer. Nobody is forced at the point of a gun to become a Bitcoiner. It is just other human beings recognizing the freedom that this thing gives, the intelligence, the brilliance of the innovation, the efficacy of this machine to continue to tell the truth and continue to stay true to reality. And so more and more people are attracted to it. Armies of nonviolent, consenting, intelligent, peaceful people are marching towards this invention that could only be made possible because there's nobody in charge of it. So I think I've gone on long enough answering your question of how important is Satoshi's story to this. It's crucial.
Yeah,
And it's one thing that no other invention can have it, right? Nobody else can rediscover what he discovered, and nobody else who's attempting to recreate Bitcoin is attempting to do it for any reason but money, power, and fame.
correct.
Right? So it's complete opposites in terms of the origin of every one of these alternatives.
Absolutely. It had that immaculate conception when it was created. He had
Yes.
no idea that it was going to be worth something. It was all theory. And then naturally, free market forces gave it a value. And then, that's roughly, which is interesting, that's roughly when he disappeared, right? Not too long after, before.
As soon as it had value, yeah. As soon as it had any value, he left. And it goes, I think that really is the testament to say he wasn't in it for the money. He was in it for the freedom, right? To create a money that didn't have somebody in charge of it, to create peer-to-peer electronic trustless cash. And he knew that there was more than just technology to this, right? It was about how it was created, and how it was created needed to be something that didn't have somebody in charge of it. How else could it be trustless? And so that's why he had to create the persona of Satoshi Nakamoto, who had to disappear. Like, he knew all of this at the beginning. He didn't come out and say, I'm going to disappear. He said, I was Satoshi Nakamoto, and we knew he wasn't. But the fact that he actually did disappear and did so quietly, right? Didn't make a big announcement about that either. We didn't have a going away party for Satoshi Nakamoto. He didn't say, in order for Bitcoin to succeed, I need to disappear. So let's everyone come and say goodbye. I'll have a big receiving line. He just sent an email to one of the developers a few months after who said, you won't be hearing from me much anymore. I've moved on to other things. Again, without fanfare.
It reminds me of, and I always say, like, when I guess it's the closest analogy that I can think of, or example, better said. One of the most important things that George Washington did in America's founding was not decide to be king. He stepped away after 2 terms, and then that set a precedent for the rest of American history. You could say FDR kind of, but mostly 99, 95% of American presidents stick to that 2-term basis. And I think that really set the tone for the United States for so long. And I think Satoshi perhaps maybe understood that on a fundamental level.
For sure.
Create this and just let it go.
I agree. And even to a greater degree, right? Because he found a way to not let somebody else be the leader. He found a way to eliminate rulers from the thing altogether. And so it's the apex. It's the apex system of anarchy, right? Or the apex system of no rulers, which is all that anarchy means. And people think it's other people running through the streets with machetes, chopping each other's heads off. But it means rules with no rulers, right? And he created this apex. It's not rules with no long-term rulers. It's not rules with rulers that have term limits. It's rules with no rulers. And the necessary step in order to create that is to not be a ruler yourself. And that's hard to do, because once you've stepped into a leadership role, but for dying, people expect you to lead or someone else to step into that role when you leave from it, right? It's like there's succession, right? Someone comes in and kills you to succeed. There's an election that happens to succeed you. Some way people have been looking at a system with a leader and they say, okay, well, this leader's gone, so who's the next leader? They don't say this leader's gone, so now there's no leader. Right? Like when the president of a company leaves, a new president is they begin looking for someone, or they usually try to have a transition period. Satoshi transitioned to no rulers, and he did so just by vanishing.
Yeah.
So it's quite a remarkable feat. We've never
So
seen it before.
no, and I don't think we'll see it again, to be frank,
Right,
or
right.
at least for the foreseeable future. So Tomer, I'll follow up with this, and let's go down the hypothetical. If he came back, it would change everything, wouldn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I think if he came back, he would be thrown out in a sense. People would be so disappointed and so angered by his coming back that they would say, like, you're the last person on earth. We're not going to let anybody be in charge of this thing, right? You left it to us. You can't come and take it back, right? There's an expression, if you give something and you take it back, you can't take it back anymore. And he knows that, right? He knows that if he came back, like, he's welcome to spend his coins, right? Nobody would fault him for that. But if he came back and identified himself and started acting like Craig Wright said, like, okay, I want to make these changes or those changes, everyone would say, go fuck yourself. Like, we're happy with the way the system is. But he's such an, like, this is such an honorable individual. We know he's not going to come back. And I think the people who say, well, maybe he will, maybe he'll do this, maybe he'll do that, I think they just haven't studied Bitcoin enough, and they haven't seen, like, you can predict what a person's going to do based off of their past behavior. And we've now seen 13, almost 14 years of Satoshi's behavior of being incredibly brilliant, incredibly humble, incredibly benevolent. And why would we expect that his personality is going to change? I think the people who might have that view are the people who haven't been enlightened yet by the lessons he taught us. And they think, and so they're still, oh, well, if I was Satoshi, I would come back and spend $50 billion. And it's like, well, if you're that sort of person, you're certainly not Satoshi, because Satoshi is a person who went into this thing not intending to spend $50 billion, who just did it for the sake of pure invention, for the sake of purely succeeding at creating something that he set out to create, not for the purpose of getting rich by it. And until you appreciate that, you might think Satoshi is going to come back and spend all his money. Or Satoshi is going to come back and try to change the system. But he showed us that you don't have to be like that. Right? That's the whole point of the invention. It's the whole point of the persona. It's the whole point of disappearing. To say you can pursue other things in life than just fame, money, and power. You can give a gift to the world. You can invent something that people think cannot be invented. And if you can do that, what an inspiration that is for everybody else. And I think that's why this expression, Bitcoin is hope, carries so much weight, because people look at that. And even if they don't make all these connections that I just pointed out, deep within, subconsciously, it's impossible not to make the connection. Once you've heard the story of Satoshi Nakamoto, you know something special has gone on here, something unlike anything else you've ever seen before.
You said a couple things there that I wanted to ask you about, and I so many good questions, but I'll say this: why does Bitcoin change us the way that it does? Why, and I think it was Max Kaiser that originally coined the term, you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. Why is
Yeah.
that? Why is it that when you change your unit of account, your whole perception of the world fundamentally changes? And from what I've experienced in my life, what I've seen it do to Opti's life, all of a sudden the nihilism goes away. You start to develop hope for a future. You start to
Yeah.
have more options. Is it the deflationary nature? Is it because your purchasing power increases over time versus decreases in the fiat system? Or is it something deeper than that?
I think it's something deeper, right? And that's what I go into in this piece. I think it we are raised in a society that says, and I've said this earlier in the call, we're raised in a society that says, look, the governments and corporations that exist are the most powerful entities in the world. They control everything. They can stop anything. They can take over everything. People are essentially bad. They're selfish. They're greedy. They only act out of their own interest, for their own power, their own wealth, their own fame, their own ego. And we know almost all there is to know. And scientists have said we can know, we do know this. This is given. This is the science. It's settled. You can do these things. You can't do those things. And it makes us feel like we're cursed, sinful, evil beings for all those reasons, right? Like we're powerless to do things against the government, against what scientists have decreed, against all these things, and we're bad in the first place because we're bad and selfish. And then Bitcoin comes around, and you hear this story of Satoshi Nakamoto, and this one invention, this in like one fell swoop, by creating this one invention without greed, that proves that governments can't stop it, and corporations try to take it over, try to copy it, try to imitate it, and fail. So it just shatters every one of these things that we're told are truths that make us feel shitty about ourselves. And we hear the story and we realize those were not truths. You can invent things that scientists say you can't invent. You can create things that the government and corporations cannot stop or take over. You don't have to do things for a greedy, selfish interest. And this is what, I don't even want to say it changes you. It shows you that certain things that you had been told were true were lies. Those things were in fact lies. And the story of Bitcoin shows you that there's something else that's fundamentally true. But it doesn't tell you exactly what is true. It just shows you those things that you were told are impossible. There are walls around you. You can't behave generously. You can't invent, like, those are no longer walls around you. And so it lets you see, it frees you from the prison of those lies. And freed from the prison of those lies, you get to discover what your potential is. And it's exciting because you were raised in this cage that said you're a greedy, selfish person. And now suddenly you're not. And corporations can control everything about you, and suddenly they can't. And the government can stop anything, and suddenly it can't. So suddenly and this can be scary as well, right? It's like if you found safety in this assurance that the government can stop anything that it wants to, and now you find out it can't, that might terrify you. But for many people, it's like, wow, okay, I can start testing some new limits. I can start exploring some things. And some people make some bad choices about what they choose to explore. But those are ultimately people that we don't consider Bitcoiners, because they're off doing things that are contrary to the values and ethos that Bitcoin presents. And so I think of it as two ways. I do think in one way, people say Bitcoin changes you, and it does, because it frees you from the prison. But freeing you from a prison isn't so much changing you as letting you discover who your true self always really was on the inside, and what your full potential is. And so I like to say Bitcoin isn't changing you, it's helping you discover your true self. And it doesn't force you to discover your true self. So if you're not motivated to go on this journey, you won't discover what your potential is and who you really are. But by freeing you from all those other lies and giving you an ability to protect yourself from attackers and liars, right? So it's not about you getting richer. It's about you being able to preserve and hold on to the wealth that you created and earned in this world. That's not about the number go up so much as it is just about not being continuously robbed, continuously attacked. So it defends you, and it allows you to be your true self. And I think that's the most important spiritual thing. That's like a value beyond money. You can't put a price on knowing who you are, discovering your true soul, discovering your true nature, and other people around you discovering theirs, and then you being able to have relationships with other people who are freed. I think that's what we're at the cusp of, right? That's what we're just starting to experience, this awakening of freedom, this awakening of self-discovery, this awakening of questioning things like what is money, of course, but what is education, what is healthcare, what is spirituality, what do I value, what are my values and my morals. So these are all things that I mentioned in this article. I don't go too deep into any of them, but I help people kind of crack open the door to say these are the types of questions you can ask, and you can look at things with a kind of purity that you weren't able to see them in before, because they were all caught up in the tentacles of institutions that claimed a monopoly on things like healthcare, education, money. medicine, all those kinds of things.
Do you so you mentioned prison, right? Is that the result of fiat money, and because fiat money was captured by government? What do you mean by prison? How is it that Bitcoin grants you this freedom? Is it because you can memorize 12 words in your head, because it's incredibly difficult for governments to confiscate on a mass scale?
Yeah,
Is it because they can't steal from you through debasement, through inflation?
right.
How does Bitcoin give you this freedom, and how does fiat take it away from you? How has fiat programmed people to believe that they're in this prison without bars?
Yeah. Well, so the first big lie of fiat, right? So, like I'm saying, you're imprisoned in. Uh, there's, I heard this story once before that apparently at the circuses, when an elephant, they kept elephants, right? And when the elephant was young, they would chain it to the floor with a strong chain, and it would try to resist and move its leg, and it would find it couldn't. And as the elephant grew, they just put a weak chain on it because the elephant believed the idea that the chain would hold him in place because it used to. And I think this is the kind of prison that I'm talking about here, right? Like uh, the prison is the belief that the government issues money, that what the government issues even is money, right? It's pieces of paper. It's not even that anymore, right? But it's just pieces of paper that they say is money. They took all the gold away. It's not backed by any work, and so now they print it for themselves. So that's a lie that imprisons you if you believe it. And many people in the world believe it. Most of us believed it before we heard about Bitcoin, right? It's like, well, some people were gold bugs and they seemed kind of crazy, and gold was just impractical and unusable. So I don't want to go too far down that whole side thing, but it's like that's a lie that imprisoned us. And so did the lie that the government knows what education is best for us. Like these are the things we start to realize once we start to realize that the money itself is a lie. So does the lie that the government can tell us what food is good for us. And the more we look at these things, we see what corrupts these ideas, right? Well, there are these corporations whose former CEOs or heads of certain departments then run for office and become the ministers or the secretaries of health and food and nutrition and all these things. And the government tells us what pharmaceuticals are acceptable to take and which pharmaceuticals are unacceptable to take. And interestingly enough, ones that can cause you to die and become highly addicted to them are permitted, and ones that might enlighten you and aren't addictive are forbidden. It's curious. It doesn't seem like they're after our best interests when these sorts of things happen, and they'll lock you up for using some of these pharmaceuticals that they don't approve of. That seems problematic. So we start to, as these lies start to collapse in front of us, we're suddenly freed to explore a much larger space of, well, what is really money then? If it's not these pieces of paper that the government sends, what is really the proper way of educating oneself? If it's not the exact curriculum that was issued and mandated by Fiat, by some government bureaucrats over some period of time, what is proper nutrition? What is proper healthcare? What is proper? There's just so many different fields you could get into. What even is art? What is so many pursuits? What is spirituality? Taken apart from the institutions that claim to speak on behalf of spirits and gods and all this stuff. There's this freedom, and this is the freedom that I'm saying. It's not easy. The answers aren't obvious. It's not like, oh, you knock down one of these walls that imprisoned you, and suddenly endless enlightenment comes to you at the snap of a finger. It's no. Now you're free to explore and learn, and it's going to take time and it's going to take energy. It doesn't come automatically, and that was the big lie of the fiat world, where the government said, "Don't worry, we have all the answers, and we're giving them all to you, and you don't have to think, and you don't have to ask questions. This is food, this is money, this is education, this is healthcare, this is the medicine you take, this is the food you eat, this is what you do when this happens." But it's not necessarily the case, and that's what we're freed from. So that's the prison that I'm talking about being freed from. And it's not just a monetary prison. It's a whole broad philosophical, ideological prison. And Bitcoin is kind of this shattering of one of the most important pillars of it, money. It's a separation of money from the state, and not just from the state, from every institution, right? It's a separation of money from corporations. No corporation issues it. No not-for-profit entity issues it. No person issues it. It's issued by itself. On its own terms, so it's very pure. And I think that's one of the other things I mentioned in this essay is this notion of purity is presented to us in a way for the first time. And we used to think money was certain things, just like we used to think we were certain things. We used to think money was part of an evil, greedy thing. And then when we see Bitcoin, which is money pure, separated even from matter, right? It's just pure essence of money. We see that it has nothing to do with any form of evil. It's just what two free people choose to use as a medium of exchange between one another when one is providing something to the other. So I think, and then we see the beauty of purity, and we want to ask ourselves, what else is pure? Like, what is pure education? What is pure honesty? What is pure taking care of yourself holistically, not looking at medicine and food as though they're compartmentalized in different things, and exercise is yet another different thing. It's part of the whole. So I'm rambling a little bit here, but you're letting me.
I think, and it's fascinating what you said about how, and I really do believe that, and I agree with you that Bitcoin is the catalyst, and I think part of the reason for that is because it was, I think the association with money and state was so powerful. It was so powerful, and they were able to regulate or destroy any competition out of existence. And now comes something, and Hayek has this very famous video in the 90s, right? Where it's like, if we have to come up with a clever way to go around it without violence.
Right.
And that happened, right? And now watching the emperor without clothes, they don't know what to do, right? And that forces them to compete. And speaking of competition, this came out not too long ago, last week, and you're going to enjoy this, Tomer. This is from a report from the U.S. Treasury, and the name of the report is, not kidding, The Future of Money. And here's a small little segment. It says the central bank is at the center of the monetary system. Reflecting this position, central bank money tends to underpin interbank payments and serve as the bank backbone of the broader payment system. In addition, the Federal Reserve provides currency, reserve balances, operates payment systems, and supervises certain intermediaries that issue private money and make payments. Even as the money and payment systems evolve, the central bank's role in vital settlement must be preserved to promote economic growth, efficiency, and other public interests. Now, when I hear that, I mean preserve the government, preserve the state. Tomer, what is your response to that part from the Future of Money report by the U.S. Treasury?
No, I refute it. I deny it. My eyes are open. The central bank is not at the center of money. The central bank is at the center of the money that the central bank issues, just like I'm at the center of these words that are spewing out of my mouth. But that doesn't make me the center of the universe. It doesn't make me the center of humanity. It doesn't make me the center of ideas. And so the central bank is one institution that is trying to say what we create is money. And I think many of us who have now scrutinized what they have to offer are saying, no, thank you. It's really, really bad what you're doing, right? Like you're maybe at some point you tried to maintain some integrity and some credibility, but right now, 1, you're out of control. 2, you don't know what you're doing. 3, you lie every time you speak. And 4, you're robbing us blind, and you're stealing through inflation and through money laundering, which you're involved in, and through insider trading, which your employees are involved in and not getting punished for. You're robbing us. You're criminals, not caretakers. And we obviously can't, as Hayek said in your famous quote, we obviously can't by violence turn it over, but by some sly roundabout way, we can exit that system. And that's what Bitcoin represents. It's a system that they can't stop. And we can choose it. And so for many of us, we choose it and they can't stop it. And now they're not at the center anymore.
So
right?
So one of the reasons I invited you today to have this conversation, Tomer, is there was something that you said, and I mentioned this in the very beginning of the show, but I never actually got to it. We were on Bitcoin Magazine Live, and we simply Bitcoin. We pride ourselves at least trying to stay on top of the social attacks, and we pride ourselves in at least providing a counter narrative to either Salvador FUD or FUD by the Treasury, FUD by the U.S. government, and the amount of attacks are ridiculous. But you said something really interesting, and it had me thinking. I said, Nico, doesn't matter what we do, the incentives of Bitcoin are strong enough that no matter what these people throw at us, we're gonna win. There's too many people that have something at stake. There's too many people that are involved. And the example that you gave was the fork wars. You said, and that was the example that you gave me. You said, look what happened to the fork wars. It was definitely intense, but so many people had so much invested. I'm not even talking about money. I'm just talking about time. I'm talking about heart, that
Yeah.
they would never let this thing
Right.
collapse. This never.
It was a war of principle, right? Like we used money, but not to get richer. We used money against people who cared only about money to get them to adhere to our principles. And that was a really powerful thing. And for people who aren't familiar with the block size wars, I do have an article on. There's obviously the block size wars, the book, which you can read. But I wrote an article that is again way more stylized because it's got this first person account of someone involved in the fork wars, and I think it's on Bitcoin Magazine. And if you search my name, you'll find it. I think it's called Cyber Soldier Freedom Fighter, and it really was for all of us who were fighting on the side of the UASF, or on the side of Bitcoin, the side of not letting corporations take Bitcoin over. It was, we'll go down with the ship. Like if we have to destroy Bitcoin to prevent Bitcoin from being taken over by the corporations, then so be it, because being taken over by the corporations is destroying Bitcoin. So we've got nothing to lose. And we're going to fight for this. And the corporations, of course, were just greedy. They were the ones who live in a world where their greed is ultimately their limitation. And for us, it wasn't. And so this is another perfect example of how that spiritual awakening, whether we were aware of it consciously or not, had already taken place within the people who were fighting the fork wars. We were fighting for principle, not for which fork is going to be worth more money. Of course, we dumped those forks when they came out, but it wasn't because we were trying to make more money, because we thought this one, like we wanted nothing to do with a corporate takeover coin or a coin with a leader. Nothing to do with that, because we are now principally, or in principle, committed to a system that has nobody in charge, no corporations, no leaders. And so we'll dump any coin that doesn't meet that, and we'll fight to the death for any coin, for the coin that does, which is Bitcoin.
Yeah. Wow. So Tomer, we're on the front lines of this every single day. Do any of these and I love the answer that you gave to me at Bitcoin Mag. Do any of these attacks worry you? Last week, if you read, I'm sure you did, read the Nick Carter piece, refuting, the
White House report,
and it was, the misrepresentations were just absurd. You could definitely make the case that it was malicious. But to me, it's very clear. They hope that they're going to continue the racket through central bank digital currencies. They completely ignored Bitcoin. They didn't say it by name. They said less energy efficient, BS. Clearly, they're taking a stance. Like they're digging their heels in, and they're basically making the argument. And I just read you a small passage that the future of money in the United States specifically is central bank digital currencies. Now, how far are they willing to do that? I think that they're in a battle against time. Time is our friend. Number go up, technology is our friend. It's just going to incentivize more people to join our side. And it's also going to increase our purchasing power, which will increase the amount of influence we have over, the politicians, right?
Yeah.
But what worries me is not the end. I think we win because we have better incentives. But what worries me is the transition period. Is that something that you worry about? I know the answer to this is no.
No, I'm not worried for Bitcoin. I worry for myself. I worry for other people, and so I do say it's important that you know when you're fighting too hard, when you're taking too strong a chance, whether you're in a do or die situation like the fork wars were. But if they're not, like Bitcoin is decentralized, it doesn't actually need you. It benefits from you, right? I said Bitcoin benefits from each and every one of us, but it doesn't need any individual one of us. So there's no point in sacrificing yourself solo for the sake of Bitcoin. It would have survived without your sacrifice anyway. So Satoshi's, like you just think about the Satoshi's was the only sacrifice Bitcoin needed to survive. He had to surrender all his coins and give up his identity and give up all the fame fortune so that you don't have to. And if being involved in Bitcoin, trying to put your name out there, or you're getting, the prosecutors or a government is coming after you, you can step back and let others fight the fight. Because as soon as you back off, it's not like the whole of Bitcoin gives up, right? I think it's kind of sad. Like Nick wrote this really great piece about this, but Nick also had his incident with Bitcoiners a couple of months ago, and you could see that he had it in his mind that Bitcoin, the community needed him, and it doesn't. And that's no inslur against him, because I'm saying Bitcoin doesn't need any one of us. It's completely decentralized. It's without leaders. There's no leader of Bitcoin who you kill and then Bitcoin dies. It's every single node, every single person. So I'm not concerned about Bitcoin's ultimate fate. Some things may happen that make it take longer. Some things may happen that speed it up. Different parts of the world, it may have more value. It may, all sorts of different. Bitcoin's completely decentralized, so it, like water flowing down paths. If you block one path, it doesn't care. It just flows around and goes the other way. Maybe you block a short path for it, so it's going to take longer to get to one location than it otherwise would have. But it's flowing and getting to where it's going to get to eventually. So there's been a lot of times when I've been quite involved with a lot of people who are deeply involved in Bitcoin, and times when they're burning out. It's just like, I can't do this anymore. It's like, that's okay. Take your time. You have all the time in the world. You have Bitcoin. You can wait. The slow time preference thing is a very important lesson to learn. Take your time. Don't rush things. There's other people to pick up the slack of what work you've been doing that you may leave behind. Someone will step up and pick up what you put down, which is a really powerful thing. And you don't have to ask somebody to do it, right? Somebody will see that you've put down whatever it was that you were carrying. And if they want to do it, which many people do want to do things for Bitcoin, they will pick it up and they will do it. And you have to let them, because you put it down. So I hope that makes sense.
It does. And you mentioned, you said, I think you have, I think we all do. I think this is a natural thing where you imagined, right? And I'm not talking about Bitcoin itself. I'm not worried about Bitcoin either. I think the incentives are so powerful. Look at what happened in China, right? They banned the Bitcoin mining, and it's estimated still between 10 to 15% of the hash rate still there, right? It's very extremely powerful incentives.
And they didn't stop Bitcoin at the same time, right? Like this is the whole. It's Bitcoin invites you to work with it, to join it, right? Like even after all that China's done to Bitcoin, Bitcoin is not going to stop China from welcoming it. And if you ignore Bitcoin, everybody else in the world is still invited to use it. So other people do use it, and it's like you've left more for them, so they get more excited about using it. If you've left it behind, you're like falling behind in this race to use Bitcoin. So many people stop using Bitcoin for some period of time. They realize that it's a mistake, subconsciously at least, and so they either rejoin, which is a sensible thing to do, or they experience what we call Bitcoin derangement syndrome, which is this irrational hatred of Bitcoin, which is a refusal to admit that it's a refusal to bend the knee. It's a refusal to admit that you're better to join it than to fight it. And really everything about Bitcoin is, you're if you can't beat it, join it, and you can't beat it. So do join it. It's not harmful, right? It's completely benevolent. It's permissionless. Censorship. It doesn't tell you what you can't do. Right? It doesn't prevent you from using your money. It doesn't prevent you from saving your money. It doesn't prevent you from spending your money. It doesn't prevent someone else from giving you anything. So it's this crucible of freedom that even in being a crucible of freedom, it says, and you're free to not use me, right? But there's consequences to making bad choices. And so if you choose not to use Bitcoin, you choose not to be free, not to experience the freedom that it offers.
Why are people, is it the conditioning? Why are people so confident when they say that? And there's even a part like the kind of game theory logical perspective. I've been in this for a while, right? You come to that same conclusion. It's like the
Mm-hmm.
incentives, just the decentralized nature of it. But why is that an overhanging fear for so many people? Like the government is eventually going to ban this thing. I think they're going to successfully co-opt Ethereum, right? We all know
It's
the
already
majority.
done. Yeah.
Boom, right? And it's the World
Ethereum has
Economic
already lost, right? Yeah. Like,
the World Economic Forum wouldn't be celebrating it, right?
yeah.
So that brainwashing is extremely powerful, right? Why is it fiat that has convinced people? It has conditioned people to thinking that the government is this all powerful, all benevolent. There's absolutely nothing you could
Well,
do.
it's fiat and fiat indoctrination. Like it's not just fiat money, right? It's a decreed education system, right? Like you don't have freedom in your education, right? Like every child goes to school and learns the federally mandated curriculum of each country. That's indoctrination. And what does it teach you? The government is good. The government provides you free education. In most countries, the government provides you free healthcare or regulation of the healthcare system to protect you. The government provides safe, sound money. All of these are lies that we discover. They're not entirely 100% complete big lies, but they're pretty big lies, and they're certainly not pure core truths. And so when you're raised in that environment, it's that example that I gave of the baby elephant that was chained up and then it grows up and somebody says, no, you can break the chain. And it's like, no, what do you mean I can break the chain? I've lived all my life with this chain on my foot and I can't move there. Don't tell me I can break the chain. I tried when I was young and I got slapped back. I tried not doing my homework at school and I got punished and I got ridiculed and I got held back. Right? So we get punished for not obeying the state, even as children, right? Just like the elephant in the story that I said. So that is why it's so hard to break free. You've got to reawaken. And that's why I said this story of Satoshi, who broke all these rules. He didn't, right? Every one of these rules, including rules like when you manage to break through and break free of these things, you get rich. He's like, well, I reject that too. Well, you get famous. I reject that too. Well, you get powerful. I reject that too. And so it's when we see a story like this that is what provides the path for us to say, okay, you know what? I can evaluate whether I want to do these things. And I do think many people take a quick evaluation of these things and they're like, that's too scary, right? Like I know I've been through moments myself where it's like, wow, this is really serious, right? Being self-sovereign creates great opportunity, but with great opportunity comes great responsibility. And that's more responsibility than I've ever had to have in my life. I got to keep my keys. I can't go to the bank and pound my fist if I lose my Bitcoin and get it back. I can't go to the head of Bitcoin and pound my fist. Like I have to be responsible for my own money. I have to be responsible for the system. There's so much you have to be responsible for, and that is part of the human experience. That was obviously the natural human experience, but also it comes with hardships, and we've tried to construct things to make our lives easier. It's just I think in my judgment, we've gone too far. It's one thing to have insurance; it's another thing to have mandated insurance that says this is the only way to live your life so that it's safe for you. Especially when then that whole thing gets corrupted and it's not serving for your safety or your welfare at all. It's whatever the opposite of welfare is.
So, Tomer, I think you said something that I've been ruminating. Like, just this is something that I've been thinking about dramatically, or like a lot. I can't find the exact word, or maybe you can even say obsessing. I think, and it goes down to the conditioning, right? We all know that famous Abraham Lincoln speech that been told, government by the people, for the people.
Yep.
When I read that report, The Future of Money, I couldn't help but to think in a country like the US, out of all places, right? To me, what it looks like from my perspective is that it's really a government by the government for the government, and it's really run by the employees of the government for the government employees, and the rest of us are all kind of tagging along. And I'll even add some data on top of that. Did you guys know, and to your audio listeners, that the United States government is the largest employer in the world? I don't know. Tomer, what are your thoughts, man? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Who's the government for at the end of the day? And is Bitcoin exposing the grift? Was it always like that? Or maybe,
No,
I think
I think we've slipped down something, right? The
was it
government used to
fiat?
be incredibly small. You've asked me at least 6 times during this conversation, was it fiat? And I'll tell you the same kind of answer. It wasn't entirely and only fiat. It wasn't like there was one moment, and if that one moment
Let me
hadn't
rephrase
happened,
it. Let me rephrase it. Okay, because I have a tendency not to explain myself fully. Was it fiat and the changes that fiat makes to the human psychology, right? And then the behaviors that that enables.
well, what even enabled fiat was something that came. Like, how did we get to the point where suddenly one day Nixon can come on TV and say, "No more gold for the money. Like the money is not backed by anything anymore temporarily," and which obviously was a lie, right? It basically stole all the gold in the world and had to do it because he'd already spent all the gold in the world and couldn't pay it back and couldn't resurface it. And it wasn't just him; it was his predecessors as well. But the moment of truth came during his leadership campaign. What in the world allowed us to get there? It was already a slippery slope of let's spend money without demonstrating the backing of it. Let's let liars into politics. Let's pretend to believe the lies that we know that are lies, that we can get something for nothing. Let's borrow from our children. Let's leave them to pay the bill afterwards. Let's distort the economy because it's easier for some people, especially those in power, to take money for themselves and not pay attention to the harm that's caused to the people who the money is actually taken from. Let's imprison those people. Let's pass laws against them. And all of this stuff is very subtle and very nuanced, but it's very what's the word I'm looking? It's very insidious, right? And so by the time we got to the declaration of money is now only fiat money, we'd already gone a long way down that path. And this is now like the story of the boiling frog that gradually gets boiled. Government at the beginning of the United States used to be incredibly small. There was no income tax. The government had no real revenue generating capacity. It wasn't the largest employer in the world. It was a very, very small thing where people did it as part-time jobs, right? There weren't full-time politicians. And then full-time politicians came, and then the grift came, and then gradually they kept corrupting it more and more and more. And now we're at this point that really feels like it's climax on the verge of breakdown because it's so corrupt, it's so broken, and we see it in so many different ways that it's tearing apart the fabric of the society and the country and the money that holds it together, and the education isn't work. Like the education doesn't work anymore, right? Nobody believes that we have a good education. We believe we have the most expensive education system, which is true, but we don't have a good one anymore. And it's not because the teachers are stupid or the teachers are bad. It's like everything about the system is broken, and it doesn't succeed if and only if it provides a good service. It succeeds by fiat. Right? Not by fiat money, but it succeeds by decree to say, well, we will tax people and we will pay the teachers and we will teach them these things and we will change the curriculum to suit what getting reelected. So everything's become terribly, terribly intertwined, and escape from it seems harder and harder and harder. And I think that's what's just so extraordinary about Bitcoin, because it escapes from the whole thing kind of all at once in one big way. None of Bitcoin requires any blessing or approval from any government ever. Right? It exists independently. It exists based on the rules of physics and math, the laws of physics and math, which no government can change and exist whether any government exists or not. And I think that's what underpins and underlies its it's like it as a savior, it as a salvation for us. Because when you attach yourself to it, you attach yourself to something that no amount of fiat can change, right? No court can rule that Satoshi's coin should move to Craig Wright, and those coins will move to Craig Wright. A court can rule it, but it can't overrule Bitcoin. No army can overrule Bitcoin. No legislator can overrule Bitcoin. Bitcoin is rules above rulers, beyond rulers. See what I mean?
No, I totally get it. And I do you buy into the theory that, and this is the last question because we're running out of time. Do you buy into the theory that this is just another human cycle, right? If you look back in, Roman Republic to the
Yeah.
Roman Empire, you kind of saw the same moral decay of society.
Yeah.
Little shortcuts over time, but those little shortcuts over decades, it's like death by a
Yeah.
thousand cuts. Are we at the end? Some people call it the fourth turning. Are we
Yeah.
at the end of this cycle? And what do you see over that hill? What do you see, Tomer, from your perspective? Do you
Yeah.
believe in the theory, Corey? I love the way he puts it, the bright orange future, right?
Yep.
What do you see over that hill, Tomer?
Yeah, I've written a number of things that I try to be like science fiction about the future. So in the short term, I've written one piece that's on the Swan blog. I think it's called "An Empire for Us All." That I say I think Bitcoin is the dawn of a new empire, and an empire that won't collapse. Because the reason every empire in history collapsed that we know of is the leaders debased the money. Okay, and Bitcoin is a system with no leaders who can debase the money. So here is the thing that prevents. Um, it's a coin that's accepted throughout the realm, which is now already all over the world, not widely accepted, but it's accepted everywhere in the world. So it's a worldwide empire with no emperor and no debasement. And so we can go on for a long time. I think, and we've never had an empire last more than 1,000 years. Bitcoin could be an empire that lasts 1,000,000 years. Which is not to say that we won't have like fourth turning type cycles within it, but not complete collapse. We'll have better times, which will lead to weaker men, which will lead to harder times, which will lead to better, stronger men, which will lead to better times, which will lead to. So I think that cycle never goes away, but it remains on the ever increasing up cycle. And these time horizons of things like 80 years, which are what these four turnings typically take, are going to be viewed as very short periods of time in human history. Right now, it's like, oh my God, countries rise and fall in 80 years. It's fiat money is only 50 years old, and it looks like it's going to fail. I think we're going to be on a much, much longer trajectory. You and I won't live to see it because it's going to be these really long trajectories, but humanity is going to thrive and succeed. And so I have a very optimistic view of what Bitcoin really means as an invention. I may be wrong. I know, and it's for our descendants to tackle the problems that come up in the future. We can't. There's all these people who are trying to fix Bitcoin now for 140 years. It's like, oh, I think in 140 years, when there's no more new coins issued, I think we should fix the inflation for it now. And it's like, first of all, nobody's going to allow you to change it now, and second of all, let the responsible people at the time who are experiencing the world at the time make the changes at the time for their time. Like we don't have to, like, it's the same, like we're now central planners of the future generations if we're trying to fix what's going on there. So let's figure out what we need to do to make sure that we hand down a solid Bitcoin to our children, but let's not try to fix every problem that they might encounter in the future. We're a helicopter generational parenting if we do that, and they can change it back anyways to fix it. So it's a waste of our time and energy. So I think we go on for a very long period of time. I think we reach the next level. This could be our passing through what's known as the Great Filter. This was the invention that we needed to not destroy ourselves or to not keep destroying ourselves. And I've got another article on Medium that I call Moving Heaven and Earth, that talks about what could be over the next hundreds of millions of years for humanity. So,
so what you're trying to say is that
what
you're trying to say, Tomer, is that we're early.
Very, very. We're finally reaching maturity as we're the species that every specimen specializes and learns, and we pass knowledge in a way that no other species can. We, like this whole conversation between you and me, right? We've changed each other by the questions and the answers and dialogue. And the people who are listening, the ideas are spreading, and every person who's listened to it has changed some way, even if they've rejected the ideas. they've heard them, and so we grow as a humanity being, right? The whole of humanity grows, and humanity has like been learning to stand up, which is civilization, but keeps falling down, which is the collapse of civilization. And we're really falling down hard now. We've gotten bigger and fallen down harder. But I think Bitcoin is this backbone, or is this tool that lets us stand up and stay standing for a very long time. Like I think long enough to explore the galaxy, right? Like that's what I think this fixes. And I may be mistaken, right? But I have I at least have some of the problems that I've identified that keeps causing humanity to fall down. Bitcoin fixes. And it fixes all the ones that I'm aware of that have caused humanity to fall down. So we might discover new ways to fuck up, but Bitcoin fixes all the ways we've been fucking things up before. And
Amen.
So it really is a kind of a miracle.
Amen. And that's a conversation for another time. The unintended consequences of a Bitcoin standard, which is a whole other rabbit hole. Anyways, Tomer, I really, really enjoyed this conversation. Thank Likewise. You so much for coming on Simply Bitcoin IRL. This is the second show. We're gonna keep doing these. Apparently, you guys like it. We got a decent amount of people watching live, so we're gonna keep doing these. Tomer would love to have you back, maybe in 6 months or so.
Sure.
And keep exploring the rabbit hole, which is endless. The longer you've been
Absolutely.
here, the longer you've been here, you realize there's no
I can tell you, this one piece that we spent all this time discussing was a bit of a breakthrough for me, and now I feel like I'm ready to move on to the next breakthrough. And there's like 16 ideas that are getting organized and made sense of for the next big push. So yeah, we haven't reached the bottom of the rabbit hole yet.
Absolutely. All right, guys. All right. I will see you later. Tomer, thanks for coming on. And I'm going to play the outro music, because if not, YouTube will cut it short. See you later. See you on the interwebs, Tomer.
Yeah, I'll see you there.
Which one's the best crypto asset? Well, Bitcoin's the best crypto asset. Okay. What's the second best? There is no second best.